We find ourselves, wherever we are in this world, in the middle of at least one pandemic, and certainly in this country and perhaps nearly around the world, two pandemics, really, two different kind of viruses, one of the body, one of the mind, and body politic. And so reflecting on what might be useful here, drawing also from the Buddhist teachings, since that is our commitment on Sunday morning to introduce principles that also align with us. After all, that's what it's for. Buddha taught, as all great spiritual teachers teach, to help, to help, to give us some kind of information that we can actually digest and integrate into our being. We know that in Buddhism, we have three modes of learning. We speak of hearing, studying, thinking, which really is already, when we mean with thinking, reflection really means, well, how can what I heard be meaningful to me? How does it relate to my own situation? So some sort of self-reflection, self-awareness is invited from the very beginning. And then, of course, we have meditation, where we really put these things that we have learned into our mind stream and go deeper and deeper until we recognize both what in us resists whatever it is we're trying to digest, and how we come to peace, deep integration of that. And I know you are aware of those three modalities. So what seems very central to consider right now, and is in fact central to from the whole process of Shakyamuni's awakening, which we have been reflecting on this month, this being the month, last Friday, the full moon, commemorating the full awakening, enlightenment, the dawning of realization in Buddha's mind. And one very central understanding that came about through sitting under the Bodhi tree, under the full moon in Bodh Gaya, was a recognition in a very particular way that truly we are all connected, not just we as humans, but all life and all that supports life, all of it profoundly, intricately interconnected. And the more deeply we recognize this and live in accordance with this natural way that things are, the better off we will be. And yet, clearly, history shows, the present moment shows, that we find this difficult. So it's useful to remind ourselves from the beginning that both science and the mystics and the teachings that we are involved with teach one way or another that we are connected. And from the perspective of Buddhist teachings, as you know, perhaps one distilled teaching that spells this out particularly concisely and precisely is a teaching of dependent arising, interdependence. This includes causality. And as we know, causality is a hugely important principle in the Buddhist teaching. One of the things that Buddha sees on the night of his enlightenment is that, in fact, everything comes from causes. He sees beings dying and being reborn due to their own actions. Beings of high status, low status, beings born into good situations, bad situations. None of it is causeless. What does this mean? It means two things, really. We can take this principle of dependent arising, which Shariputra was taught by the Venerable, I think his name is Asvajit. He said, when Shariputra was first starting out, as we mention every now and then, he said, oh, it's so complicated. All these teachings, 84,000 teachings the Buddha taught. Just give me the gist. What's the gist? And in the end, the gist is dependent arising, or more precisely, that verse, the Yedharma verse that we always say when we do our purification of speech, that the Buddha taught how he taught the causes of those things which arise from causes and also their cessation. So, what does this mean? Since there is cause and effect, and that is one very important type of dependent arising, it means that if we can understand the causes of our own experience, our happy experience, our painful experience, if we can really understand those causes, we are in a position of power. We are in a position to shift the way we walk about in the world, and hopefully, ideally, if we get really good at it, to model how others might also walk about in the world. So, as I was thinking about this morning, in different ways that we might talk about this, we could say that this principle of dependent arising really is undergirding two of the most central teachings that we have in the Buddhist tradition, and that is the wisdom of understanding that things are different from the way we ordinarily treat them. We don't treat things or ourselves as if they arise from causes, typically, let alone as if they merely depend on their parts, let alone the most subtle interpretation of dependent arising, that things depend on us and how we perceive them. And those of you and most of you have studied Madhyamaka and mind only and some of the philosophical systems and theories of perception. And you know that this is detailed in quite precisely in many Buddhist contexts. But I want to kind of stay with the pith here. You will recognize how relevant it is to other things that you have studied. So this situation of dependent arising means, on the one hand, it means that things are always changing. Impermanence. In this regard, I often say and feel that Buddhism really teaches what life teaches. If you live long enough and if you keep your eyes open at all, we realize, don't we? Sometimes we remember that change, the ongoing process of cause and effect, is always present. If you observe the seasons, things grow green. They bear fruit. They fade away. In climates where there's winter, nothing grows for a time. Change of the seasons, the change of weather, and most importantly, for us as practitioners, the shifting in our own inner state. What is characteristic about our inner state? One of the things that is, the first noble truth, the first ennobling truth is how things are unsatisfactory. What is unsatisfactory? Well, as an organism, just naturally, like any creature, we want stability, we want safety, we want to feel protected, we want to feel that we can relax and not be on guard all the time. We want things to stay the way they are. If they're good, we want them to stay the way they are. And they will not. We have profound outbursts in our world right now of things not staying the way they are. Maybe it will lead to some opening. Human consciousness, we don't know. And that's the positive side of impermanence. When things are bad, that also won't stay the way it is. So the situation in which we find ourselves is very dynamic. The fact that things are far more susceptible to change than we believe, most especially including our own minds, our own habits. We know how intractable some of our habits are, even when they're obviously pernicious. We know better, but we can't do better, because what's in our heads, our brains, our knowing, our intellectual, cognitive knowing, it takes training to get that to kind of percolate into how we actually live in the world, and not just in a forced way, but how we actually experience the world. So dependent arising opens to an understanding of impermanence, opens to an understanding of the fact that as living beings in our ordinary situation, we are always susceptible to unsatisfactoriness, to discomfort, to untoward change that brings us distress. We can't really contradict that. Study history, study psychotherapy, study sociology, study biography. Much of it is the narrative of pain of one kind or another. So that's one part of our existence, what we can call our karmic face, but it's certainly not the whole deal, because the whole reason, as you know, that the teaching, that friends, that therapists point out to us our deficiencies, point out to us our susceptibility to disease, COVID. What's the point of pointing that out? To teach us what we can do to protect ourselves, with the assumption that in principle we could. We haven't done a very good job of it in this country, but some countries have. St. John's Island, I heard from my cousin recently, had 2 cases of COVID, and they're gone and they're free of it. Sikkim has no cases. There are things that one can do to address the situation. And that's our Buddha nature face. So through the principle of dependent arising, we recognize that things are always shifting, that there is an underlying causal process that might allow us to inflect how the direction in which things shift. Think about that a lot in political terms nowadays, right? What can we do to make it better? What did we do that made it so bad? What have we been doing? And also, there is tremendous optimism in the Buddhist teachings, as you know. The only reason that one starts with the ennobling truth of the difficulties we face as living organisms is because there is something we can do about it. And most especially, we can do something about it because, in fact, the way that we really are is not clawing, desirous, jealous, competitive, narcissistic, wounded people who flare out and do things that are untoward. But we have a sky-like nature that is none of those things, that is free. There is a part of us that is already free from all of that. And we find that part of us, or at least a kind of, just as the light of a jewel leads us to the jewel, when we touch into our experience as we sit in meditation, as we allow our thoughts to just settle to the bottomless bottom that they dissolve into, we ourselves, don't we, find that there is something in us that is not just fear, wanting, hating, upset. If there weren't that part of our being always and for sure there, the situation would truly be hopeless. So we take great hope, even just on the basis of our own experience, let alone what the great teachers and lineage masters tell us, let alone what Buddha himself discovered in his experience. We also seek to discover in our experience, and we do discover it. So in these ways, the teaching, this gist of dependent arising, teaching us that everything is connected in particular ways. The space, the ground of being is also connected with everything that arises from it. They're not like 2 worlds. Everything is whole and here. And this we seek to deeply, deeply understand, because it will be a passage out of pain and suffering. So dependent arising opens to wisdom in all of these ways, to impermanence, to understanding our own potential to change. And of course, And most significantly, really what I want to land on for today, it opens to compassion, to kindness. And this is very important because our own innate goodness, our own innate sense that fairness, justice is absolutely essential for a world in which everyone is connected. Where does that start? It doesn't start in the legal forum. Laws that over centuries have come into place in some places that at least are meant to protect those who need protection, which in one way or another is all of us. Where does that start? It starts from some basic sense of human decency, from some recognition that I'm in a tough spot because I want to be safe. Everybody else feels the same way. That is such a heart opening. It's not an intellectual thing. We say it over and over again to remind ourselves because it turns out we need a lot of reminding. But the more and more we get familiar with it as something that we hear, the more and more we recognize from our own experience how true this is. How when we see a small child in danger, when we see grown people being mercilessly threatened in ways that are completely unjust and unnecessary and not just part of the inevitable problems of samsara, really. Don't we have compassion? We have concern. We may have upset, but what is going to be most, and upset's good, wakes us up. It is a kind of awakening. Things are not okay the way they are. And what is even allowing us to reckon with that is some kind of sense of responsiveness, responsibility, some acknowledgement that we ourselves have experienced pain. And that's actually very important. That's a basis on which we can understand other people's situation, other people's pain. People who are in denial are not going to help. People who are in climate change denial, people who deny that Black and brown people in this culture and around the world, in many places, have not been treated as fully human, they're not going to help. And in many cases, this kind of denial comes because of an unwillingness to recognize pain, which is going to have to start with recognizing our own. So we start there and we recognize how much we want happiness, don't want suffering. What we sing every day, we'll sing it when we begin our session. That's really the whoop and wharf of our practice and our activity in the world as well. So we're in a situation where we're all connected, where we can begin to recognize this in a heartfelt way, partly through teaching on dependent arising, interdependence, interarising, partly through recognizing that we are all connected. Until COVID is gone from everywhere, no one is safe. Until justice exists everywhere, no one is safe. That's how profoundly this connection works for us. And our working toward that starts with caring about our own happiness and recognizing that that's the template for everybody. If we can care about our own happiness, it's just so natural to recognize that, I mean, how could you stop here? So one of the key practices that we have, as you know, is Tonglen, the practice of giving and receiving. And we've been talking about this. And really, it unifies all of the wisdom and compassion teachings, and undergirding both the practices of wisdom and compassion, as you know, is some capacity to be aware, mindfulness, introspection, honesty, just honesty. I feel hatred right now. Oh, that's not correct, but I feel it. Okay. Can't deny that we feel it. We don't have to act on it. Quite the contrary. It's, oh, I can work with that. Maybe not my greatest, worst fear or hatred, but I can start. And so Tonglen really brings together all three elements: wisdom, compassion, and presence. And as you know, Harvey has been talking about from this lovely little book of Tonglen, of Pema Chödrön. And I also looked at it, and because she's got some wonderful, very brief suggestions where she talks in the first part of this about Tonglen in daily life. So I want to start with a few principles here that are surely familiar to you. And we hear and we reflect and we'll meditate. We'll put maybe a short Tonglen part in our meditation this morning as well. So perhaps we're feeling badly. We're feeling depressed. So we might be inclined to head to our email, turn on the TV, turn on the radio, and distract ourselves. It's okay to soothe ourselves sometimes, but we need to balance that with recognizing, okay, this is how I feel. And stop fighting. Now, I'm not talking about life-threatening depression, but I'm talking about the ordinary down in the dumps. It can feel pretty bad, right? Well, one thing we can do is just say, okay, here it is. And we can breathe in and allow ourselves not to feel ashamed, not to feel scared. Try to drop the story around it. Oh, I'm always like this. Why can't I be? But just drop the story and feel it. And then, Harvey has talked about this a lot from John Goncontre, we'll use that as a way. You're already a practitioner. You've already committed to opening to compassion as possible. And feel, okay, here it is. May everybody else's sadness be right here, contained in this. And may they be free of it. And then, with your exhale, send them some relief. You can do this with I think it's good to start with a specific person. Somebody you know, some neighbor. And then also, the mind is enormous, has no limit. That's why we call these the boundless states. And after you've exhaled some relief to a few people or one person, you can just feel that you're sending it everywhere. Now, that's the same principle that we do with our awe. We feel that we're sending our good intention as light and sound everywhere, but you can do it just with your breath. And then she talks about traffic jam, Tonglen. So you're stuck in traffic. Cars are piled up. It's hot. You're late. You're tired. Your plans are being totally disrupted. You hate it. You're angry at everyone. And then you open your eyes because you've learned how to wake up a little bit in the middle of this kind of situation. You realize everybody around you is totally pissed off also. They're having their own anguish. Oh, so what could you do? You could recognize that and you could have a sense of compassion for yourself. This is pretty miserable. All these people are having misery as well. Look around and realize all the people stuck in the jam are feeling the same way you do. Breathe in fully what you are feeling. And send out a sense of relaxation and relief for yourself, because the breath carrying relief is moving through your body, bringing relief, light, sound, however you want to experience it, to you, and then moving past what we think of as a boundary between self and other, but really there's nothing there. It goes out easily without any passport and without any obstacle at all. It goes out to the other people in the lanes to the right and left, before and behind. It's such a simple principle. And if we can remember to do it, that's already huge. Because, as I certainly know from experience, yes, I love this. And when I get all tied up in my own samsara, my own go around, oh, I'm late, what am I going to do? I'll have to explain, my phone's not working, I can't call ahead. That's samsara. That's the samsara that Buddha saw in the night of his enlightenment, people going round and round and round. And just to remember, oh, wait, everybody else is like this too. Oh, here I am, confused again. Oh, breathe it in, breathe it out. It kind of helps. At the very least, we recognize our connection with others. And if there's anything we're learning these days, sense of real connection is vital to our survival. It's vital to moving determinedly, peacefully, powerfully toward justice. It's vital to undoing the kinds of lines we have drawn in our own minds and hearts between ourselves and others. And in this way, we are moving toward the wisdom of interdependence, of interconnection. In this way, we are just very naturally opening our hearts to ourselves. It's okay to open your heart to your own suffering. If you can't open your heart to your own suffering, you will not open it to others. You will be like this. We will be like this. I am like this. So this recognizing of our own vulnerability, I think that's part of the brilliant and really luminous message of the first noble truth, the first ennobling truth. We're vulnerable. It's when we feel invulnerable or want to pretend that we're invulnerable that we pretend everybody else should be, up by your bootstraps, we say. Well, people don't have bootstraps. And that's not a function of their potential. It's a function, an artifice of culture, of aspects of culture that have not moved forth from a grounded sense of connection, interconnection, intimacy, love, open-heartedness. And that's why we pray every day with our 4 boundless states, that we can embody these in ways that really make a difference. And it's 10:59. So we'll relax, because that's where everything starts from. We'll relax. The prayer sheet, you mean the yellow sheet? Is that what you mean? Yeah, the lemonade sheet. Can I have something to drink too?